Hello parents and professionals, this is an exclusive video for members only, and I'm going to be educating you about a topic which won't be applicable to all parents. It may be applicable to all educators, and it's something that you may or may not have come across before, and it is selective mutism. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what selective mutism is, or what makes it occur, and most importantly, what you can do about it if you know a young person who is struggling with this particular condition. So selective mutism is kind of exactly as the label suggests. It is a form of mutism, but it is not a permanent problem. That young person picks and chooses, so they select the times at which they will be mute. And very often, selective mutism occurs at times when they feel most under pressure, most anxious, most stressed, or where they feel just more under the spotlight. So they're not in an environment that is well known and comfortable to them. And in some cases, selective mutism can continue even though someone has perhaps been in the same school or the same class for years and years and years. The selective mutism may continue, and then it's more out of habit. And I think that term spotlight is probably an important one in the discussion around selective mutism, because whenever they feel like the spotlight is on them, it makes it even harder for them to be able to speak and express themselves verbally. Now, what we might see with a child who has selective mutism is that they are naturally quite shy, but they're usually absolute chatterboxes at home, and parents and siblings would say that they do not stop talking. You sometimes find with children with selective mutism that they will have perhaps one or two friends in class who they will speak to. They may select only to speak to children and not to adults. They may select an adult that they can also speak with if they're in a quiet enough environment. Sometimes selective mutism can last an entire school period, and from that I mean from reception to year 6. I know some children who have remained mute in school for that entire time, and school is definitely going to be a popular one where mutism might occur. It may also occur for that child in activities, after school clubs that they attend, if they do gymnastics at the weekend. Those may also be locations where they choose to be mute. Sometimes children have mutism with extended members of the family who do not live in their house. And even though they may see those family members quite regularly and be comfortable with them, they may transition, although it's more rare, from being talkers to mute. So it's unusual for them to become mute with people that they previously spoke to. But if there has been an incident that upset them in some way, or a period of time in which they didn't have contact with that person anymore, then they may select to become mute with someone that they previously were not mute with before. So the interesting thing about selective mutism is it's not the same as mutism. With actual mutism, it tends to be more like a disorder of the brain. So there would be a lesion in the brain, so some form of brain damage within the motor cortex, or related to the sort of language motor cortex areas, that causes someone to be mute. And whilst somebody might have other speech and language difficulties that cause them to struggle to formulate their words and put sentences together, with mutism, so real mutism, not selective mutism, but with sort of a real brain condition of mutism, very often when those people do speak, they're quite motivated to do so, and they can transition from not being able to speak to speaking very quickly, quite suddenly. So that's quite an unusual thing with mutism compared with other language disorders. It can turn around really fast, and there's an awareness that they have a problem, and they're often very motivated to get that problem sorted. With selective mutism, there is no brain damage, there are no lesions in the brain, and everything in the language and motor cortexes, so relating to the mouth, the tongue, the voice, are working exactly as they should do. Everything functions. The difference with selective mutism is that it is a choice. Now, I've had debate with people before around the word choice, because some people might say that the level of anxiety that someone with selective mutism, has causes them to not be able to speak. So they don't have a choice. But the reality is they can choose to speak in other contexts. So they can choose to speak. And they can, of course, choose to work on overcoming their anxiety so that they're able to speak in these other areas. And the older a child becomes, the more you can negotiate these sorts of facts with them. So here are my tips for helping a young person to overcome selective mutism. If they are very young, the way that I would encourage them to begin speaking is by talking to them all the time and replying to my own questions as if they had. So I'm putting zero pressure on them to do any of the work. I don't want to put pressure on them because they're already feeling anxious. So I would make a point of talking to them in a normal conversation, but answering my own questions in place of waiting for them to answer. And very often, I will deliberately answer those questions wrong because it's very, very frustrating for them. And in many cases, that has caused them to get so frustrated that they correct me. And then the spell is broken and they're able to speak. And when I say the spell is broken, don't underestimate that phrase. This is literally like it's like the curse on Ariel when she gives her voice to Ursula the Sea Witch and she can no longer sing. It literally is like a bad spell. You need to break the bad spell. When you've broken the bad spell, it's broken. You can pretty much snowball things in the right direction from there. Not necessarily in all contexts straight away. There might still be some environments where they feel uncomfortable speaking, but very often you can really get the ball rolling quite quickly. So with younger children, I just talk at them, get things wrong, and eventually they will typically correct me on what I'm saying. The important thing for older young people is that spotlight effect. You want to avoid, now here's the tendency. The tendency is make sure I still include them so that they still have an opportunity to speak if they want to. So if I'm going to go around the class and ask everyone to contribute something, I'll still ask that person even though they don't speak. That is the worst thing you can do. Because when you do that, that's the spotlight on them, and that they cannot handle. They do not like that. You will be better off if this is an older young person. So I'm thinking like, say, year 4 or 5 and above. For that person, you need to establish communication with them in an environment where there is not a spotlight. So you would be more likely to do it on a one-to-one rather than with others there. You would be more likely to sit side by side rather than face to face. You would be more likely to initiate conversation with gestures, with handwriting first. You know, if you can get them to communicate as a starting point, if you don't already have that, do that first. You don't need to jump from 0 to full-on verbal conversation. You just need to get them conversing with you first. So you might do that by initially getting them to write down answers, Then you can move towards nodding heads and shaking heads to get some non-verbal but physical communication happening. Then you can move to, I want you to answer me verbally, but I'm going to turn my back on you. Or I'm going to step out the room and I'm going to record what your answers are on a device. There is no one else in the room that will hear you. But I just want to be able to hear your voice and know what it sounds like. So all of these things you can do to sort of gradually inch them forwards to becoming more and more comfortable. If you get to a stage where they're able to talk to one key adult in the school or in the environment that you're in, then you can get their permission to bring one other person in. But again, we want to avoid moving things too fast, moving things forward too fast and throwing them into a scenario where they get that I'm under the spotlight sort of sensation all over again. So there's a lot of different strategies that we can put in place for a young person who is experiencing selective mutism. It can be very fluid, case by case. And so that's why it's a good idea to always speak with one of our practitioners to discuss the specific case that you're looking at, so they can give you some specific strategies to suit that individual. But selective mutism is definitely something that can be overcome. And one of the ways in which some young people overcome it is simply with a reset. And by reset, what I mean is that if they have never spoken in their primary school and we start addressing this in year 6, maybe they'll speak, but maybe they never can now because they never have in that environment. They are willing to do it. They're willing to let go of the problem, but it's existed for too long in that specific context. So it may be that they've overcome the anxiety now. They're ready to let go of the selective mutism now. They don't need that to protect themselves anymore. But they're not going to be able to do it until they switch schools. Because when they go into the new school, it's not going to be a surprise to anyone if they speak. But if they now speak in that primary school, people may react positively, obviously, but those reactions create the spotlight. And that is the one thing that they really want to avoid. So I hope you've all learnt some useful stuff there about how to deal with selective mutism. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments box down below. And either myself or one of the NLP for Kids team will hop in and give you some more specific answers to the questions that you've asked. But thanks so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!